You're listening to the Emissary Authors Podcast, where we help faith-driven founders and entrepreneurs tell the stories that matter. This episode was made possible in part by the Emissary Author Workshops and our title of the week, The Hope of War, from Emissary author Larry Cripps. Go to publishwithemissary.com/workshops and thehopeofwar.com for more details. Welcome to another episode of the Emissary Authors Podcast, where we help faith-driven founders, executives, and entrepreneurs tell the stories that matter. I'm Paul Edwards. This is my co-host, Jason Todd. And Jason, this is going to be an exciting episode. We're chatting today with my good friend, a fellow member of the Men of Greatness Mastermind that I was formerly a part of, Pastor. And now he's got a book coming out this year. He's been working on it for a while. And we're gonna chat about that. So let's bring on Jon DeCuir, joining us from SoCal, my brother from another mother.
Hey man, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Can't complain. I'm excited.
You got a lot of things going on. I was taking a look at your website. You've also do music production.
I do. I got a lot of stuff going on. It's I like to think of myself as like I have one focus with three different ideas, right? So my only focus is purpose and vision, and I express that through music. I express that through our coaching business, which is where the book is coming from, and I express that through ministry. Those are the three things. That's how I do it.
Well, you're kicking us off really well there, because your book, My Purpose is the Solution, it sounds to me as though that wraps those three elements of how you're expressing your purpose into the world into a unified message.
100%. I feel like music is everything's about language for me. And I think that, between all three, that's the one thing that's cohesive through everything is just language, different ways to communicate that same message. And that's kind of the core of who I am and how I actually, present myself to the world. So that's kind of what I feel like I'm here for.
Mm. Yeah. So Jon, we go back a few years now.
Yes, sir.
And, I can remember a time where this was quite a hurdle for you in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And maybe we should start there with just a little bit of the journey, the evolution you've been on.
Yes.
From the point of view of, what we're always trying to tell people to do, what we're always trying to remind people is, if you have experience, wisdom, knowledge, a message that you believe has the power to change the lives of even just one other person, you have a responsibility to become good at communicating that and to share it.
Yes.
And I want to hear a little bit about the background of how you went through this long, circuitous journey to get to where you are today.
Yeah, it is a journey. So just in full transparency. So I really want to encourage authors out there. Everybody starts differently and everybody is very different in their approaches. And so like for me, I actually started with speaking these things out. So I was doing a conference with my organization called Session 5, which is more of a coaching type of thing. And so I was actually speaking. And so I did 5 different talks, right? That were all recorded. Mm-hmm. And after I recorded all 5 of those talks, then we pulled them down and I got a group of people together and we took the next, I want to say 2 years. And we said, wait a minute, all 5 of these different conversations you were having are in the same thread of purpose. In particular, what my message is really based upon, in the Bible, Numbers 13:33, which is like, being small in your own eyes, which makes you small in the world, is basically kind of what that passage says. And so how does my perspective affect the way I see the world, right? And so, we took about 2 years to flesh that out. And I did that with like 5 different people. So then after, everybody gave their 2 cents, right? We came together with a document that was from all those messages. So we transcribed them first and then we did interpretations of them. But because I have 5 different people, it had 5 different voices.
Yeah.
So then it took, another whole 2 years, right? I found it's actually one of my goddaughters, and she was like, hey, this is kind of everywhere. Let's just me and you do this so that it can just sound like one person.
Mm-hmm.
So then it evolved into another thing, right? And then I met you, Paul, and then your company even honed it more. So it started off with 60 pages long. And when I was done it, you know, after you and after I'm now where I'm at now, it's at 223 pages long.
Nice.
So it's like evolved, and like figuring out ways to tell this message. And I think on the journey, what I have found is in that 5 years, the book actually, kind of also shaped me. You know, there's I think it's Michelangelo. He said, I saw a rock and I was chiseling just to free what was inside of it. Right.
Yeah.
Like the whole book process was like something that, you know, I was like kind of in this cage, and in the process, I was kind of set free. And so that's been my journey. It was long, but I wouldn't trade one moment or one day, because now I feel like I got a definitive work that feels like my voice and feels like where I am right now presently.
Reminds me of the saying that the man who says the blessing will himself be blessed.
Yes.
Sorry, Jason, I cut you off there.
Right. The visual that comes to my mind is that of a river and the many tributaries that flow into a river. And, I mean, specifically, you know, think about the mighty Mississippi.
Yeah.
It's like 2,300 miles long. And the definitive start of the Mississippi, the furthest end of it, is this small trickle, I think, that flows out of Lake Itasca or something like that, Minnesota. And yet, you know, I don't live very far from a river that flows itself into the Mississippi, and you could drown in my tiny river, and you most certainly would drown in the Mississippi at certain areas. And I think of that process that you're going through, where you started with that trickle, and then you invited more tributaries into the flow. And then as it starts to develop, you gain momentum, but it's a different river.
Yep.
Each point.
Yes.
And each tributary stands on its own. Each river stands on its own, but they all flow to the Gulf of Mexico.
Yes. 100%. I love that analogy. I mean, and it's funny because, you know, there were also some frustrating times in there. Right. And, you know, that's kind of when I met Paul. I was like in a cross where I had got it to a point, but I needed someone to help me to push it. I think a lot of times, you know, like I said, everybody's different. Some people are just natural writers, and that's just kind of what they do. That's not necessarily my story. I'm more auditory. And so I have to like speak my stuff out. Even to this day, before I write anything, I have to talk it out. So for me, I have to express it first before I can write it. And then, you know, from an author standpoint, then figuring out a way, because I have certain, I think it's called colloquialism. I can never say that word right, but I have a certain way I talk, and I want the book now to translate, you know, how I talk.
Yep.
Right. So then there's also that piece of it. Like when you're writing a book, trying to figure out, you know, between the boundaries of language and grammar and all those things. But also trying to make sure you be authentic to yourself so the reader can actually feel like you're sitting there almost talking to them, which was kind of like my aim.
Yeah. I remember from the process that we went through with you, Jon, and it was primarily Cody who was doing the back and forth, you know, the reworking of all of that. But I remember at the time from both of you getting some wonderful feedback that, you know, you were really able to let that voice speak. And Cody was doing things the way that, you know, we've always done them, which is let the voice speak and then reflect it without losing respect for flow and, you know, and readability and all of that. But that's really what we wanted to do. I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand that when you write in partnership with others,
yes,
you think better about what you're saying. just not just you as the author, but the person helping you.
Yes.
Is compelled to cross-reference the way you say things. It's like Jason did just now with the tributary river example.
Yes, 100%.
And say, what's a useful way of putting this so that we don't just spew information at a reader, but we tell a story, we give an example, we give people a visual in some cases using words.
No, 100%. I feel like the collaborative process is so vital because after all, right, we're not, the book is my purpose is a solution. I didn't write that book just so I can read it. It's for other people, right? So it's like when you invite other people into the conversation, it totally expands the way you see it, but it also tells you how the message is landing, right? How people are understanding,
Yeah.
And so even, I've seen, I have friends that's authored books. And so I kind of took a page out of their book. I sat down, I sent the transcript to, a couple of people so that I can see what kind of, what are you feeling from this? What do you see from this? And they, got a lot of great feedback that really helped me to get to the end of this process. And I'm so excited for people to read it and get a chance to sit with it.
It seems to me the process is a lot like sound and production of music, because you need the artist. And I'm a sound guy. I've done a lot of sound stuff in my time.
Yes.
And I run sound for people occasionally. And inevitably, one of the musicians is like, "Hey, how's it sound? What do you think about, what, can you up this? Can you up that?" And I think the last time somebody said that to me, I said, "I am confident in how this sounds."
Yeah.
Because up on stage with an in-ear monitor, you are not qualified to counsel me on how it sounds in this auditorium.
100%.
It's not. And furthermore, I'm a musician too. So I know your job.
Yes.
I know my job.
Right.
And I feel like the writing process or any creative process is very similar. We are sometimes that musician being like, "Hey, I've got this thing and I think it's so amazing and wonderful."
Right.
But the audience isn't connecting. And there's sometimes a go-between, which may be a sound person saying, "Actually, we can enrich this. We can make it palatable.
Yep.
And we can take what you're giving us and make it better so that it connects with the audience." Or sometimes tell the musician, no, this is a mess. Do not play this.
Don't play those notes.
It's not the way you think it is.
Right.
You love it and nobody else does. That, I think, it underscores the necessity of allowing time for that message to come together, even in one's own mind, but then have it come together with other people so that, so like music, you get a groove.
Yes.
And when you're in the pocket and when you're not, and it is subtle. But when you hit it, it's a completely different song.
Man, you are totally speaking my language. Can't tell you how many times, I've been on stage, on the piano, and, you feel something, to your point, you feel something on the stage. And depending on how temperamental you are as an artist, that the relationship between the stage and the sound, the front of house are the ones doing the stuff for the house, right? Could be, the tension sometimes can be interesting, but to your point, there is a place where both parties connect that is undeniable and everybody knows it. Everybody on stage knows it. The sound people know it. And most of all, the audience knows it. It's almost like there's this place where everybody meets. And I think that's what I was looking for with this particular book. Where is the place where everybody can meet? Because even with my cultural context, I was processing some of the things I was writing, and going okay, is this just what's my audience? Is it just for these people or is it just for these people? And if it's for all people, how can I be authentic to myself? Right. And still get everyone involved with the process of at least reading the information to see if it's even something that they even are processing in a sense, and what are those pivotal points of compromise, I want to say, because I think sometimes that word gets a little bit of a negative rap. Like people say, I don't always think compromise is a bad thing. Like where are those points where I can go, okay, this point doesn't sacrifice my authenticity. It's just simply a place where I'm tweaking this so that I can speak to more people.
Yeah.
And I think that's also important when writing books.
This is what we were just talking about, Jay, in one of our recent conversations, that, suppose you had an audience full of people of different genders and backgrounds and religious persuasions and nationalities, but they could all understand, they all can understand English. And yet there's things that you can say that, 20% of the audience will understand and 80% will say, what's he talking about?
Yeah. Yep.
But then there are other things that you can say and 100% of that room will have some frame of reference to that.
Yeah.
And what are those things, right? Yeah. What are the things that are not unique to men versus women, young versus old, one race versus another, right?
Yes.
What is universal? Because if you've tapped into what's universal, you're tapping into the way God designed the entire creation.
Yes.
The stuff that is never going to change, that's him.
Yes.
And so, you talk about a theme of overcoming adversity, right? I don't care what stripes you wear, you are going to be overcoming adversity if you 100%. Live on this planet.
100%.
And so I totally get what you mean there. And compromise is one word that can illustrate it. But again, like you said, there's a connotation around that. So what we have to do is be careful to acknowledge that there are differences, but also, to say at the same time, there are things that separate us and there are things that we share.
Well, yes. And I think that's important. Being an author, especially these days, right? We're in the information age, and being able to be compelling also, that's another thing, right? To be compelling in your writing is also something that is not just a suggestion in these days, right? It's a must because, I have a 16-year-old. It's hard to get him to read because of these things, right? So it's like, like the phone, like that, the access to the level of technology, like there's a level of compelling that you must be in writing. So like the creative process even has to be, at another level. And so that's the other reason why I'm like that collaborative piece and that seeing what all those, whatever pivots you have to make in your authorship is so important, So these my thoughts. Yeah.
I think this analogy with sound is pretty spot on because like what you just talked about, how you have to write in a certain way to be compelling is very similar to a concept in theater that you play to the back of the room.
Yeah.
It's on stage, it feels too big.
Yes.
And when I've coached people with sound, I'm like, when you feel like you're awkward, you're so big, you're awkward, you're probably hitting the front or the middle. When you feel like, oh man, I've overdone it, now you're to the back of the room.
Yes.
You got to fall in love with the feeling of what it feels like to be in that space. And that's what I'm connecting with when you're talking about, writing in a certain way so as to connect.
Yeah.
And then the other thought is, you're talking about, contributions from other people and, we're thinking of gender issues. We're talking about race issues, just context issues.
Yes.
Which, and I'm sure this will connect for musicians. It'll, John, what I'm talking about, that when you get a group of musicians together, if you get a group of musicians who all want to be soloists, that makes a pretty awful band.
Yes.
And like, it's like the guitar player is always doing a guitar solo and he's it's like, quit it. Or the bass line's always doing a bass solo, or the drum's always doing a drum solo. Everybody overplays.
Yes.
And it becomes a mess.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a skilled musician, let's say communicator, knows how to sometimes underplay a bit, pull it back, allow space for who needs to take that line at that moment. And it's interesting that when you look at some of the best songs, the songs that really connect, let's say recorded songs, those instrumental parts are so simple, and sometimes they're not playing anything.
No.
And when it comes together, it makes a fantastic song.
Yeah.
But people think that they have to play all the time. You don't have to play all the time.
This is 100% correct. I mean, man, like the analogy is so spot on, so perfect, because that was my experience with the first writing group is that everybody was brilliant. But like literally, if we're taking a transcription from something that I was saying, right? And that's what happened. My first manuscript had literally 5 different voices. Like everybody was like taking their own part, like ripping, right? And I'm like, well, wait, like, can we all like, look, we need to, let's just choose a voice. And that's when I realized I had to go a different route. It had to happen differently in order for me to get to that space, where I was able to at least get to a place where I could even talk to Paul. Like, okay, now this is a document. So that first document was just like, it felt like a jam session,
which has its place.
Yeah, which has its place, right?
And it's in particular, it has its place right at the beginning when everybody's getting to know each other, where everybody's kind of like, what are we going to do with this thing? Let's make it ours. Yeah. Fine, jam out, but it eventually has to find a groove.
Yeah.
And until it finds a groove, it's just a mess, and it's okay to be a mess.
Yes,
but not when you're pushing.
Not okay to stay a mess. Yeah.
So I'm curious. Let's go into that a little bit deeper then.
Okay.
Think about the relational process at play when you have multiple voices involved, and you need to direct or produce in some fashion and tell a person, you know what, we're taking your voice out. It doesn't fit.
Yep.
Walk us through the process for you as you're refining this. How do you take care of the relationships in the writing process?
I firmly believe that honor takes care of most things, right? And so that first group, the reality of it is that they created the bridge for me to walk across to get to the next phase, right? So I didn't have any pages before. So what I did is that I had a conversation with all of them, and there was enough time that passed to where everybody kind of knew I was moving. So I kind of first communicated, let everybody know that I was actually moving to do something different. But I respected their time. And as a token of my appreciation, I got everyone a gift, and I gave them specific honor in the book. I talked about each one of them individually and how much they helped. So if people read the story, they don't just read about just my purpose and solution. They get the chance to read, the story of how this whole thing came about.
Yeah.
So like, that's the way I dealt with it.
I think there's something to be said as well, John, for when there is sufficient preparation or vision up front, vision you're very familiar with, right? There is, with people who have the maturity to handle it, there is a conversation around, this is the vision that we're moving towards.
Yes.
And what you've contributed has been valuable, yet it's not going to get us any further than it already has.
Yes.
So, right, either we have the ability to expand on that, or we have to stop here, right? Not negating anything that you've done, simply acknowledging, right, this. And sometimes, right, the vision isn't always clear at once, and you only get to it later on. But in either sense, if there's that mature, open line of communication from start to finish, over time, and I'm not saying this is much easier to talk about than to do, obviously, but I think that'll carry you a long way.
100%. I think that's very good wisdom. Like the putting the vision and talking vision throughout and letting the vision be the separator, right?
Yeah.
Are the thing that pushes you to the next phase. So that's also, that I would agree with that 100%. That's also something that happened, but that's the way we got to one sound one sound in this book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which it sounds like the process that you employed and that we're talking about here is very similar to the topic of being or living out a purpose, living on purpose, finding your purpose. A lot of times it's a fits and starts. It's a mess one moment and it feels like it hits a groove the next.
Yeah.
And that process is necessary. And I feel like so many people want to hurry up to get to the end to be like, I've arrived. But it's actually the process, I think, which is the important part of finding a purpose.
Yep. I feel like I had a mentor tell me that the reward is the journey. And I have found that that's 100%. That's truth 100% of the time. The reward is the journey. You just don't know that until you get to the destination and you go, man, I wouldn't trade any of these things. Like when you're in it, you got the frustration, the irritation, all the things, right?
Yeah.
But then you get to it and you're like, man, I wouldn't trade one incident, because if you move one experience from the process, you no longer have the end result.
I think also the process is the preparation.
Yes.
And so if you short circuit the process, you short circuit the preparation. Paul, I think you've been a bodybuilder before, haven't you, Paul?
For a little while now.
All right. So the process of going to a show for bodybuilding is intense. It's not for the faint of heart. You have to make lifestyle changes to be able to show up in that space.
Yeah.
The prep is more fun than the show, I've discovered. I would rather do the prep. I'm not kidding. I've been on stage. And I mean, the photos look really cool. It's when you realize I get all of 5 minutes up here and I walk around and do these poses, and these people who don't even know me are making judgments about whether I'm better than this guy next to me. Right. And you suddenly because I did it at age 39, and I had some familiarity. I'm not trying to drag this off on a tangent. I'm just telling you the process, right, is actually you should seriously dig into loving the process, because the finished result is great. Don't forget, finished result, once it's done, it's over and done. It's what you carry forward into the next process you go through from, loving this process that's so valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
sorry, Jason, I went completely off on a tangent there.
No, I think it's fine. I think it's valuable because in my experience, so many people want the results and they don't want the process. And if you are unwilling to go through the process of, let's say, the topic of your book, living on your purpose and finding your purpose and all that involves, if you're unwilling to go through the process, you don't deserve and cannot handle the purpose if it came upon you.
Right.
Yeah.
No, agreed. This is exciting. I mean, even talking about this, I know I wish that I would have had this to listen to before I started. Because just, hearing you all, the analogies and just the conversation, I'm like, man, how valuable would this have been if I would have heard this before I started? So this is cool. I appreciate you guys even doing this. This is so awesome.
Well, we appreciate you too. And I find myself thinking of this so often, how, what you just said, Jason, right? We sit there and we watch, athletes who are at the absolute peak of performance, the Tom Brady's and the Peyton Mannings of the NFL, right? And they make it look so easy. Even among the top players in the world, they still are head and shoulders above them, and they make it look so easy. He just steps back and throws the ball, and everything else works out.
Right.
Both of those guys would tell you. I know Manning has said this. He said, "I love practice more than big games." Because practice, I can do the play over and over and over and over until I can't get it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Then I go on to the big game, and that play's easy. I read the defense. It's, okay, we're going this way. I'm not going to mess that up. Why? Because I know it so well.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
And I'm like, that's the key. That's what so few people are willing to do.
100%. I'll say this too. I think my encouragement in the process too is you got to consider the root or where you got it from. And I'm a very strong proponent of inspiration. And I personally, my opinion and my belief system is that inspiration is divine. It comes from God. And I think when you approach book writing, and I always say this, that writing is one of the fastest manifestations of God, because you're taking something that does not exist or has not been seen, and you are inspired, and then you take that and you put it to paper. And when you're doing something like that, and I bringing something that's from a divine space into the world, the understanding of that makes you appreciate the process more, because the enhancement and all the thing that comes along with forming the completion of this thing, you realize was handed to you as a steward of something much greater than you. And how wonderful is it to be able to do that? I'm reading a book by Isabel Wilkerson right now called Cass. And this kind of puts me in that mind frame. Like I'm reading this book and it's riveting, but I can feel her inspiration for it and all of the pain that came with what she wrote to get this book to the world. And I think about that, the process of or being appreciative in the process for the inspiration that comes as something that doesn't necessarily just belong to me, but it was given more so for me to release it, as opposed to, this is mine type of thing. Right. Just a thought. Maybe that was a little bit convoluted, maybe a little deep, but that's how I think it goes. Like the importance of authorship and writing.
I have a close friend who went through some pretty challenging things in his life. And when he was talking to me at towards the end of, the issues had been resolved, he was recounting to me an experience that he had in a men's group. Where a gentleman he was speaking, who was sharing that morning, was saying all the things he's gone through, right? And my friends started to speak into this other gentleman's life and say, here's where you're at and here's where you're headed, and I can tell you it's going to be okay. And so as my friend is telling me this story, he said, I thought that these things that I'd gone through for the past 20 something years were going to be gone. I didn't want to look at them anymore. I thought I could just push them behind me. They were done and over. I've moved past and through them. And he said, and in that moment, I realized that my experience and the fact that I've traveled down that path is actually not for me to just move on. That might be a gift in and of itself, but the gift to others is the fact that I can help them walk that same journey.
Yeah.
And I feel like this idea of what we're talking about, purpose and the process, identification of your purpose, working with other people, and how it is so universal. These topics are so universal and portable from one experience to the next. We're talking about writing, we're talking about sound, we could talk about art, we could talk about all sorts of things, movies, film. Anytime we go into this creative energy, which I think is people could disagree with me, but I think that's also kind of the image of God, right? We get a creative energy and ability to do things.
Yeah.
And shift the future.
Yep.
That it necessitates us feeding one another with our experiences, and then us kind of going back and going, okay, what do I do with this? How do I shift my viewpoint? What do I need to remove? What do I need to add so that I can attend to my journey, but also attend to this guy's journey when he needs me?
Yep.
I feel like it's a big to-do. What are your thoughts on that?
I 100% agree. It's like you get an experience that, like, even the essence of this podcast, right, is is based on people's experience. And now you're armed with all of the like answers, if you will, right? Everybody has different sets of answers, and to be able to release those and give those to people so that they can actually, avoid some of your pitfalls, you know what I mean? And then come up with their own, and then they'll get a set of tools for someone else. And it's just kind of, I feel like it's an elevation with each thing. So the thing that happened with your friend, I think is definitely a portion of our process as authors. Is you learn and you give that information so that the next writer doesn't have to go through what you went.
And I was thinking, Jon, as you mentioned, as we're winding down here, but I was thinking of your comment that writing is one of the quickest ways we imitate God, because we're taking something ethereal and abstract, and through the power of the tongue, or the power of the written word in this case, we're spelling out a reality.
Yes.
And it took me back to this quote from Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, who was a 16th century rabbi, and he said, language determines reality. Everything else is mere convention.
Wow.
And of course, then you immediately have to face the fact that the three of us on this podcast all exist because of a conversation.
Yes.
It began usually on the part of our father talking to our mother, which led to marriage, which led to our birth. Yeah. But at some point, we all began with words.
Yeah.
Long before we had physical bodies, right?
Well, if we can end this on a good joke, I saw a meme, and this kid's talking to his mom and says, "Mommy, did you want me?" And she looks back at him and says, "You? I wanted a back rub." All right. Well,
talk about getting more than you bargained for.
That's funny.
Well, Jon, your book, My Purpose is the Solution, where people can go to JonDeCuir.com to find out more about you.
Yeah.
Give us some words of wisdom to authors who are embarking on this journey of writing their own books.
This is what I would say, is don't give up. And even when you get into the lows, are what we call writer's block, or there are ways and connections that you can make that will spark inspiration again. And so I would say find the wells of inspiration would be the thing I would say. Mm-hmm. And figure out what those are for you. What people are those, what environments are those? And once you find the wells of inspiration, make sure you go there so that you can keep them.
I love that visual. Well, Jon, thanks so much for joining us on the Emissary Authors Podcast. This has been a great conversation, very meaningful to my life. Thanks for joining me.
And no, I appreciate you. I almost want to go back to my book and put all of your analogies in there because they fit perfect.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate you both.
Always good to be with you, my friend. And thanks for joining us for this episode of the Emissary Authors Podcast, where we help faith-driven founders, CEOs, and entrepreneurs tell the stories that matter. My name is Paul Edwards. This is my co-host, Jason Todd. We've been chatting with Jon DeCuir. We will see you next time.
Ready.